UFC 289 betting and DraftKings show. We have 11 fights this weekend, $200,000 to first place up for grabs on DraftKings. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the women's strawweight division, we have Diana Belvita, currently a pick'em against Maria Oliveira. This fight is very low level opening the card here. I don't think you could really trust either one of these fighters. We'll start on the Oliveira side. She made her UFC debut against Tabitha Ricci, got completely out-grappled in that spot. She most recently fought Vanessa Demopoulos and lost the decision to her as well. So that's the one clear leak in her game. Listen, her striking's okay. She seems to have a little bit of power for this division, but she can be taken down. And when she doesn't really work back to her feet all that well. She can definitely be taken advantage of on the mat. But this should be, for the most part, a kickboxing matchup against Diana Belvita, who is capable of landing takedowns. We've seen that multiple times across her UFC fights, but she's not the best grappler. And typically that's where she's paid the price, is she's been submitted 4 times in her career. On the feet, she's looking to push a high pace, and that's kind of what I'm expecting here, is both of these girls to just throw a ton of volume and really just put on a competitive kickboxing matchup. I do agree with the line movement. Belvita opened as a small underdog. Now it's moving in her favor, and I think that makes total sense here, because if either of them is going to implement the grappling, I think that would lean towards Belvita. So I slightly lean with her in this matchup. Belvita by decision is the official pick, but there's just better fights to target on this card. Which brings us to our next fight, which is in the flyweight division, as David Dvorak comes in as a big favorite over Steven Ursig. Ursig was originally scheduled to fight Clayton Carpenter just a few weeks back. It ended up getting scrapped, so now he's coming in on relatively short notice for this fight against David Dvorak, and I think this is one where Dvorak's getting a step down in terms of the competition. He's fought Manel Kopp, he's fought Mateus Nicolau, he's fought some of the better fighters in this division, and he hasn't been able to get one of those clear wins, and now he's taking a step back against a guy like Steven Ursig, who's the former flyweight champion over an Eternal MMA promotion. He's primarily a grappler. Most of his wins have come by submission. His striking's not great, but he is okay pretty much wherever the fight goes, and I would think he'd have the grappling advantage here. David Dvorak is just a very well-rounded guy. I think he's the better striker. He's not really known to be super aggressive or throw a ton of volume, but I do think he's the better striker here. He should be winning most of the minutes standing, and really Ursig just needs to get the fight to the ground, and if he does, he can potentially threaten with something on the mat, but Dvorak's not a horrible grappler either. I think the most likely outcome here is Dvorak wins the striking exchanges and avoids getting submitted on the mat and probably gets his hand raised. But if that's the case, he's pretty expensive on DraftKings, and above that 9K range, I'm just looking to target those other fighters. I'm not really interested in David Dvorak here, and I'm pretty interested in Steven Ursig, even though I think, like I said, the most likely outcome is he probably drops a decision. There's not really that many underdogs I like this week, and we only have 11 fights on this slate. So Steven Ursig is one of those fighters that does have a path to victory that involves grappling, and he has some finishing potential as well if he were able to find a submission. So in terms of DraftKings, I'm definitely going to be overweight to Ursig this weekend. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Blake Bilder, a minus 225 favorite with the comeback on Kyle Nelson at plus 190. And this is a fight that I love to target on DraftKings because I think regardless of who wins, the winner is going to score well. We'll start on the dog side in Kyle Nelson. Nelson's not a great fighter. He's lost like 4 of his last 5 fights. He really just has to hurt guys early, and he is capable of doing that. We've seen time and time again where he swings for the fences early, and if he catches you, he can get you out of there. However, as the fight goes on, his skill set is just so limited, and so is his cardio, that we typically see him fade as the fight goes on and really just get dominated. And then I think in this fight, Blake Bilder's a guy who I think is a pretty solid prospect. We saw him fight on Contender Series last season. He got that submission win over Alex Morgan, which was a decent win in its own right, and he's got power on the feet. We've seen, even on the regional scene, he's dropping guys, he's stinging them, but what's really impressive to me is his ground game. He has solid wrestling, he's capable of taking guys down and controlling them on the mat and threatening with submissions as well. 4 of his 8 wins have come by submission, so he really just seems like a well-rounded prospect, and we saw him perform pretty well considering it was his UFC debut against Shane Young, who's a pretty solid opponent. And Young just didn't really want anything to do with his striking, and he was able to land a takedown in that spot as well. So I just think Bilder's a well-rounded guy with high upside. The one concern with him is we have seen him get stung multiple times across the regional scene, and I think that's the one concern in this matchup with Kyle Nelson is Nelson could bomb on him early and potentially get him out of there. But if he doesn't do that, I think this is Bilder all day, and I think he gets it done inside the distance. So I like the under 2.5 here. I think it's a favorable price, and I love this target on DraftKings. We're going with Blake Bilder by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up's in the bantamweight division as Richie Lang comes in as a -125 favorite with the comeback on Amin Zahabi at +105. And this is one where I'm just going to go with the guy who I think we can bank on to be the more aggressive fighter, the one who just simply wants it more in Richie Lang, because we've seen time and time again with Amin Zahabi, yes, he's a technical striker. Yes, he's a decent submission grappler. He just doesn't try to get the fight to the ground, and on the feet, he's not doing enough in terms of the output. So he's a guy who's very finish reliant, and I'm just not sure he's going to be able to finish Richie Lang here, who's for the most part pretty durable. He's very hittable in striking exchanges, and we've seen him pay the price for that in the past, especially against guys like Jeff Molina, who just took over down the stretch. But that's really what you have to do against Richie Lang, because while he's fresh, he's moving forward, he's throwing volume, he's being aggressive, and I just think that's going to be too much for Amin Zahabi unless he's able to time the perfect counter punch. And I'm just not willing to bank on that at near a pick'em price tag. So we're going with Richie Lang. I think he wins the striking in terms of the output. I think he's more likely of the two to land a takedown. So I lean towards Richie Lang. I like the price here. I think he's a decent target on DraftKings as well. I'm just fading Zahabi here, and if he beats me, so be it. So we're going Richie Lang by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to the women's flyweight division as Miranda Maverick is a -305 favorite with the comeback on Jasmine, Jassy fighting in her home country of Canada here at +265. And this is a matchup where I just think Maverick's a better version of Jasmine. Jassy Maverick's a very well-rounded prospect. She comes from a Muay Thai striking base, solid striker, decent power, but she also has a good ground game as well. She averages over 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and she holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, Jasmine Jassy is coming off a win over Gabriela Fernandez, where she was able to land multiple takedowns there and really just control that fight on the mat for over 10 minutes. It was a very impressive victory, but I just think this is a much different matchup for her. I think Jasmine sort of needs those matchups where she's able to have sustained grappling success, and I just don't think she's going to be able to do that here against Miranda Maverick, who can be taken down, but is typically hard to control, and she's decent at reversing position. She's a good grappler in her own right, so I just think the physicality, the striking, and even the grappling favor Miranda Maverick here, and I'm not even really sure if Jasmine's going to be able to have success in the clinch, and that's really what she's relied on in multiple fights here, and Maverick's very strong in the clinch as well. So we're going Miranda Maverick by decision. I think she's a pretty safe parlay piece this weekend, but there's just better fights to target for me on DraftKings. Which brings us to our featured bout on the prelims. This one's in the middleweight division as Nasser Imavov comes in as a -155 favorite with Chris Curtis on the comeback at +135. And this is a matchup where I've never been really a Chris Curtis guy. Yes, he's got a ton of power. I'm just not really sure that I can continue to bank on that in some of these really difficult matchups. Like a lot of these fights, he's losing minutes on the feet and losing rounds until he's able to find that knockout punch. And I'm just typically not going to feel good about backing that, especially at a price tag like this, against an impressive prospect like Nasser Imavov, who's coming off a main event decision loss against Sean Strickland there. But I just think he was outclassed in that spot, and Sean Strickland's very well-rounded. Chris Curtis, yes, he's got that great takedown offense, but he's very one-dimensional in that he has to land a big power shot on the feet, and I'm just not sure it's going to come against Imavov, who is a good striker in his own right. He's proven to be very durable throughout his UFC run here, and I just think he's going to have success moving forward, pressuring Curtis, having success in the clinch as well. We've seen time and time again when Chris Curtis is unable to time that big counter shot, he's just kind of lost on the feet. And I know statistically he lands decent volume, but there's multiple matchups where he's just kind of gun shy a little bit, because if he's not able to get in close and get those big pocket exchanges, he just tends to struggle at distance. And I think that's what's going to happen here against Nasser, Imavov. Curtis is also very hittable as well. So even though Curtis has the big power, I'm looking to fade that here. I'm not sure if I'll get to a bet on Imavov, but I do think he gets his hand raised here and gets back in the win column. And kicking off the pay-per-view main card here, we're going to stay in the middleweight division as Marc-Andre Barriault comes in as a -150 favorite with Eric Anders on the comeback at +130. And this is a matchup where I just have never really had the greatest read on Eric Anders, because he's so hot and cold to me. Like, one time he comes out and he just doesn't look really all that aggressive, doesn't look all that dangerous, and has just been underwhelming multiple times throughout his career. And then there's other times where he comes out, like the first Darren Stewart fight, which ended up being a no contest, but he just looks like an absolute killer, super aggressive, landing big shots on the feet. We've seen him mix in the wrestling recently as well, which is great to see. But in this matchup against Marc-Andre Barriault, I'm just not sure if this is a good matchup for Eric Anders. Marc-Andre Barriault, I think, has more output on the feet. He's not the biggest power guy, but in terms of the volume and being able to pour it on, that's what he does. He's coming off a knockout finish over Julian Marquez, where he was landing constant elbows in that spot, and he did get buzzed early in that fight, but he's able to persevere. The cardio, the output, that's what he leans on, and then he's able to just pour it on these guys. They call him the power bar for a reason, fighting in his home country in front of his fellow Canadians here. I just think I favor Barriault in terms of the cardio and the output down the stretch, and I just don't trust Eric Anders to be able to come in here with the right game plan and trust him to be as aggressive as he needs to be against Barriault here. So we're going Barriault by decision. That's the official pick. Up next, we have a fun matchup in the featherweight division as Dan Ige comes in as a -250 favorite with the comeback on Nate the Train Landwehr at +210. And this is one where I think it's just going to be fireworks from the opening bell, because we know that Nate Landwehr, that's just who he is. Every time he's in the octagon, he is looking to put on a show for the fans, and he very rarely disappoints in terms of entertainment. And then on the flip side, we have Dan 50K Ige, who's known to have big power in his own right. We saw that in the Gavin Tucker fight a few years back. We saw that in his most recent fight against Damon Jackson, where he melted him with a knockout. So Ige has power as well, and Ige is also no stranger to putting on big performances. So I think these two are going to clash. I think this is a good matchup for Dan Ige, because what Nate Landwehr is good at is cardio and output, and he's able to do that against some of, not the best fighters in this division. But once you start to face good fighters where cardio, output, heart, like those things are great intangibles, but they're not enough to put you over that hump. Dan Ige has good cardio in his own right, decent volume as well. He's a very sharp boxer, and I already mentioned the power, and I think Dan Ige is probably the better wrestler too, so I'm not expecting Landwehr to really be able to implement the ground game either. And then the last thing I'll say is Landwehr, while he's super exciting, he's also been hurt and knocked out multiple times. We've seen him knocked out in the first round twice in the UFC already. I don't trust his durability because of his fighting style. I just think he's going to get tagged. He's going to get clipped at some point, and I think Dan Ige puts him out. So I like the under here. I like Dan Ige on DraftKings. I'm going to have exposure to both sides, but the official pick is going to be Dan Ige by TKO. Next fight up, this one's in the welterweight division as Mike Malott comes in as a -205 favorite with Adam Fugate on the comeback at +175. And this is a really fun matchup for me. I'm intrigued by this matchup for a couple of reasons. For starters, I do think there's upside on both sides for DraftKings. Obviously, Mike Malott, one of the more dangerous finishers in the division. All of his career wins have come inside the first round. In fact, the one time he's fought out of the first round, he fought to a draw. And that was on the regional scene. Now, this guy is very dangerous early, so you can't really rule him out, because what he's good at is he's got a ton of power on the feet, a lot of wins by knockout, but he's also a good grappler as well. He's got multiple submission victories. We saw that on Contender Series, where he wrapped up that guillotine choke very nicely there. He's very opportunistic early. Now, where he struggles, and this is where I think Adam Fugate may be able to take advantage, is anytime you don't let Malott be the one moving forward and you pressure him, you can land on this guy. We've seen it time and time again in that Hakeem Dawodu fight that he lost on the regional scene where he was knocked out. It was finally when Dawodu didn't accept the back foot. It was in the first round. He tagged him good and ended up getting him out of there. We saw it again against Mickey Gall in his UFC debut. Yes, he got the finish. Excellent knockout, beautiful timing on that left hook. But prior to that, Mickey Gall was tagging this dude. He busted up his nose, and it was when Mickey Gall was moving forward. That's when he had the most success. I don't think that Malott deals well with pressure, and I think he's very unproven in terms of his gas tank once things, once that early finish doesn't materialize. What's it going to look like when you have a guy like Adam Fugate who's constantly moving forward and pressuring, throwing a variety of kicking attacks? He's also a good wrestler as well. He's attempted 15 takedowns across his 2 UFC fights. He wrestled in junior college. I think he could land a takedown or 2 here, especially if we see this fight get extended. I think Malott is super, super dangerous. As I mentioned, there's a good chance he probably hurts and maybe even finishes Fugate early in this fight. But what I'm more interested in is what if that doesn't happen? Because if it doesn't happen, I think there's a lot of things that are going to be going in Fugate's favor as the fight gets extended. And I actually think I favor him in rounds 2 and round 3 here. So hopefully we see that materialize and see how it plays out. But I like Fugate here as the underdog. He's my favorite underdog on DraftKings this week. I'm going to have exposure to both sides because you can't ignore the round 1 finishing ability of a guy like Mike Malott fighting in front of his home country in Canada. But Adam Fugate's been in enemy territory multiple times in his career. Just a few years back, he traveled to New York. Tiger Schulman fighter Solomon Renfro, it was in his backyard. He played spoiler on that night and finished him in the first round. He's been there before, and he pulled off the big upset in his UFC debut as well. So this guy is always being undervalued, in my opinion, and I think that could happen here, especially considering the questions we have on the Malott side if he doesn't earn that early finish. So I like Adam Fugate here. I'm hoping this fight gets out of the first round and we see him take over. We're going Fugate by TKO. That's the official pick. And up next, we have what I think is the most exciting matchup on the card. We have Baniel Dariush and Charles Oliveira. Baniel Dariush is currently a minus 145 favorite. The comeback on Charles Oliveira is plus 125. They were originally supposed to fight at UFC 288 in Newark, and I'm still bummed I didn't get to see that, but I'm very excited to watch it this weekend regardless. You have 2 of the best grapplers in the division. Baniel Dariush coming off that big performance against Mateus Gamrot where he came through as a sizable underdog, and that was really impressive. Not just the grappling, the high-level scrambling where he was just able to beat Gamrot to a bunch of spots, but also the striking. He was winning the striking. He tagged Gamrot multiple times, and we've seen that across his career. Baniel Dariush, yes, he's always been known as a dangerous grappler, got a ton of submission victories, excellent scrambler, but don't forget about this dude's power on the feet. He is hurting guys left and right, and he clearly has knockout power. So he's just one of those fighters that is just so good wherever the fight goes that he's just really hard to deal with. And now he's going up against somebody in Charles Oliveira, most submission victories in the UFC history. He's one of the most dangerous guys on the roster because similar to Dariush, he's got striking as well. It's not just the submission grappling you have to worry about. He's got power on the feet. He's got nasty knees in the clinch. Like, these guys just match up so good to me that I just think there's no way this fight is not entertaining. So I do lean the Dariush side. Both guys have durability concerns. They've been finished a bunch. They've been knocked out multiple times. Both guys have clear finishing upside, but I just lean towards Dariush. I think it's his time here. I expect him to be the one in more dominant positions on the map because even though Oliveira's super aggressive with his submissions, sometimes that means he's on his back more, and I could see a guy like Dariush who's so skilled in the grappling to be able to consolidate position, avoid those submissions, and really just bank minutes on the mat while the fight plays out on the mat. Obviously on the feet, both guys can tag each other, but I think Dariush is more powerful. I think he's more dangerous. I like Benny to get it done here, which brings us to our main event. This one's for the belt in the featherweight division. We have Amanda Nunes looking to defend. She's a big favorite at minus 320. The comeback on the challenger, Irina Aldana, is plus 265. And this is one you guys know, if you've listened to me for a while, you guys know I'm an Amanda Nunes guy. I think there's very few, if any, girls across 2 divisions that can be able to really give her much fits. And I think this is another one of those matchups where they just really don't have anybody that makes for an interesting fight, that makes for an interesting matchup. that just has the tools to compete or beat Amanda Nunes, and I don't think Aldana does either. I think Aldana is a good fighter, don't get me wrong. She's a high-volume boxer. That's really what she's leaned on to get to this point, is she's a good boxer, good cardio, good output. That's all great. But when you're fighting someone like Amanda Nunes, Nunes is going to be much more powerful on the feet. She's going to have a clear grappling advantage as well. Nunes averages a couple takedowns per 15 minutes. We've seen her lean on that as recent as her last fight against Juliana Pena, where she landed multiple takedowns, banked a ton of control time. She just has such a high floor, and she's so difficult to beat unless she just comes in not managing her gas tank. That's the one thing with Amanda Nunes. Time and time again, there's been multiple occasions where her cardio just wasn't right. But obviously, we've seen that from her in the past. The thing is I think Aldana has to have Nunes gas to be able to take over and finish her. So I think it's a really low probability outcome. I think Nunes probably knocks her out, maybe multiple takedowns, and eventually submits her. Either way, I think Nunes gets it done inside the distance. I think this fight clearly favors her from a stylistic standpoint, and I think she keeps her belt on Saturday. We're going Nunes by submission. That's the official pick. And as always, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. There's $200,000 to first place this week, so be sure to check those out. I'll have ownership projections as well. It's completely free. It's fightnumbers.com. I'll pin it in the comments. And as always, I appreciate the support, guys. Best of luck, and we'll see you next time.